Hello, and welcome to the book for May. So, the book for May is going to be Asylum Lake, and the author is R.A. Evans. It was published in 2010. It has 34 chapters with, I think, another ending maybe. It says Grave Untakings. Okay, although I read chapter 1 yesterday, I'm going to read it again. Ready? Here we go. Chapter 1. Looking Back to Look Ahead. April 10th, 1972, Bedlam Falls, Michigan. 6 days squirreled away inside the small room behind the clerk's office had anger, divided, and eventually broken the juror's spirit to the point of surrender. The exhausted procession of wrinkled suits and downcast eyes shuffled to the jury box as hushed whispers swept across the anxious gallery. 3 sharp raps of the gavel brought the courtroom to near silence. The Honorable Orrin J. Hutley's stilly glowy finished the job. He was a sour old man with prune lips and deep lines that crisscrossed his face. With his thin neck jutting out from the top of his black robe and talon-like fingers grasping the gavel, he surveyed the courtroom like a vulture perched menacingly over dying prey. Leaning forward from his roost, he placed his elbow upon the bench and pierced the jury box with his unblinking stare. "Mr. Foreman, has the jury reached this verdict?" Sonny Dietrich, jury foreman and Bedlam's only insurance salesman, slowly rose to his feet. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." Huntley shifted his attention from Dietrich to fix his eyes on the stoic boy seated at the defense table. His words scraped like sandpaper from his dry mouth. "Will the defendant please rise?" Dressed in a crisp white shirt, the button tightly at the neck, and sharp gray trousers, the youth rose alongside his attorney. Awaiting the verdict with the unfailing faith of a supportive father, the Reverend James Collins stood directly behind his wisp of a son. Delicate features defined the lad's fair-skinned face, while hair the color of autumn leaves spilled down over his forehead. But beneath the maze of curls, brown, lifeless eyes stared, as cold as 2 pennies rusting in a late November rain. The boy's eyes could chill blood. Shaken, Huntley tore his eyes from the defendant, recasting his focus towards the jury box. "Mr. Foreman, as of count 1 of the indictment, the murder of Joanne Reed, how does the jury find?" "Your Honor," he hesitated, "we find the defendant guilty." The words passed through Dietrich's trembling lips with cowardly hesitation. Both joyful tears and heart-wrenching sobs erupted from the gallery. Huntley lurched to his feet and banged the gavel on his bench. "Order! I will have order, or I will clear this court." The commotion subsided to a degree. Soft murmurs hung in the air. Huntley collapsed back into his chair as the hum of cameras and recording devices reverberated throughout the courtroom. An army of reporters from across the state had invaded the small town weeks before, asking questions and digging for answers. But answers had been elusive, and each detail that had emerged throughout the trial had only posed more questions. The reporters, for now, had the answer that mattered most to them and were salivating at the prospect of sharing it. In a matter of moments, young Lionel Collins, the same boy who had shoveled driveways and mowed lawns, and with whom Sunday sermons and meals with most everyone had been shared, had been found guilty on all 5 murder charges. He had been convicted of brutal crimes committed not only against his neighbors and community, but against humanity itself. He was led by deputies from the courtroom. The chains that were clamped tightly about his wrists and ankles jingled with every unbalanced step. He peered over his shoulder into the gallery. A sly smile curved his thin lips. In the wake of people rushing from the courtroom, a nondescript man rose from a hard wooden seat in the back of the gallery. His presence during the trial had gone unnoticed, as it had been at the funerals months before. Not that anyone should notice. More than a decade had elapsed since he had last walked the streets of Bedlam Falls. The man was pale, with a tuft of dark hair atop his head and rail thin. His natty black suit hung from his bones, eerily similar to the way clothes hang on a scarecrow. His sunken and red-rimmed eyes, appearing to have stared into the bottom of one too many whiskey bottles, darted around the empty room as he made his way forward to the oak table where Lionel returned each day to sit with his attorney. Resting on a desk's polished surface lay a bracelet. The man's whiskey-soaked eyes widened as a look of recognition. Then horror crept over his face. With a paisley hand, he scraped it from the table. Much as a painful sliver slowly worked its way from one flesh, this sinister token had somehow surfaced from the murky depths of Asylum Lake. Alone in his knowledge of how it had come to rest on the rocky lake bed, the man looked down at the wood stamped on its battered surface and winced as he traced a trembling finger across the cold plastic. He stood there trance-like. Suddenly, his gnarled fingers closed around the bracelet, quickly hiding it away inside his breast pocket. As the stranger walked from the empty courthouse into the damp air, a chilling wave wrecked his entire body. He paused on the step, steadying himself against the handrail. The spring breeze, which usually held the promise of brighter days to come, today carried an ominous scent. With more than a passing suspicion that Lionel's verdict and the evidence introduced throughout the trial had been an omen of a long-forgotten darkness looming on the horizon, the man in the black shambled from the courthouse. Breathing slowly and deep, he placed a protective hand over his heart and headed south into the afternoon chill, the Lord's Prayer falling from his lips. That is the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, Homecoming, April 18th, 2010, Bedlam's Fall, Michigan. There was a Bedlam's Fall before the trial of Lionel Collins and Bedlam's Fall after the trial of Lionel Collins. Dell's Grocery had been replaced with a Kroger, and 13 miles outside of town, a McDonald's now greeted the tourists exiting off of US 31. On the surface, little had changed in the quaint northern Michigan town. However, buried deep in the marrow of Bedlam's Fall, malignant wounds, I'm going to highlight that word because I don't think I remember that word before. Malignant wounds from the town's dark past were beginning to fester. 4 years after Lionel's conviction, Ford Motors Company had decided the sleepy town would be as good as a place as any to build a stamping plant. As new jobs and unfamiliar faces flocked to Bedlam's Fall, the close-knit community transformed. Gone were the days of unlocked doors and neighborly chats over hedges. Within just a few short years, the town backwoods charm and personality were replaced with the same Malayas, that's another word. Malayas that people had once come to Bedlam's Fall to escape. Brady nearly missed the exit. His mind had gone numb 4 hours into the 6-hour drive from Chicago. As he pulled out of the McDonald's, a brimming cup of too hot coffee cradled between his thighs, anxious knots began their tug of war inside his stomach. 6 months ago, he had been the young ace at the Chicago Tribune. His investigation and coverage of the shocking murder of Janie Pierce, a 28-year-old pregnant mother of 3 who had been beaten to death outside of downtown Chicago eatery, had been picked up by the Associated Press and made headlines across the country. The perpetrator was a homeless schizophrenic who claimed that voices had urged him to commit the crime. He had been a familiar figure within the revolving doors of Cook County overburdened mental health system. The case had resulted in swift and sudden changes in town of chronicle mental ill received treatment in the state of Illinois. Janey's Law, as the legislation would later be named, mandated monthly psychological I know this word. Psychological testing be performed and evaluated by a team of state certified medical specialists before and after a patient's release, as well as bi-weekly reviews of a patient's medical history and medication usage. The goal of the new enforcements was an attempt to safeguard the general public as well as the patient from the physical and psychological strains associated with their reintroduction to society. Although some measures were met with opposition, the so-called, draconian measures coined by human advocacy and civil rights groups, most were lauded by neighborhood organizations and law enforcement agencies alike. Illinois' crime statistic linking Cook County mental health discharges with violent crimes had risen steadily since the 1980s, but only after Jamie Pierce's untimely death and Brady's thorough and meticulous exposes was the facts eliminated. Brady's critically acclaimed work, which had been a catalyst in the institution of Jane's Law, resulted in his name and the Pulitzer Prize being talked about in the same conversation. The award had never materialized, but Brady's reputation had still transcended itself. The buzz around the newsroom had him being groomed for the city desk. All this before age 30. Although most of the Tribune's elder statesmen found his boyish good looks and casual style more than a bit off-putting, his newfound yet well-deserved celebrity had provided a much-needed boost to the paper's slumping circulation. His female co-workers, however, were all in agreement. Brady Tanner was very easy on the eyes. His reporting had also garnered attention from the publishing front, and before long a book deal had been discussed with a signing bonus large enough to finally move out of their shabby one-bedroom apartment above the bakery on Lexington. New dreams could be realized moving to the suburbs, a home office for Brady, and a home large enough for a budding family for Karen. As negotiations with the small publishing intensified, the couple collectively crossed their fingers and toured a gorgeous 21,000 square foot colonial located in the quiet northern Chicago suburbs of Morton Grove. While walking down the hall toward the second-level master bedroom, Karen had already mentally decorated the first room on the left. The perfectly sized nursery room would be done up in greens and yellows since they had already decided to keep the baby sex a surprise. Even though she desperately wanted to paint the room cotton candy pink, Karen knew that boys ran in her family. She prayed the baby feet that would one day, in the not-so-distant future, be scuttling across the floor would belong to an Allison or Audrey and not a Brady Jr. Not that she would be disappointed if she had a son. She just wondered how a girl raises a boy. Brady raised the coffee to his lips and took a slow sip. Damn! At the sound of his voice, Brady passenger sat up. I guess I won't be using my taste buds for a while, Gruff? He reached over and began to stroke the yellow lab that rolled beside him. Gruff smiled the way only a dog owner could recognize, and curled back into a ball. Gruff had been Karen's security system. 3 break-ins and a handful of muggings in the South Side Armour Square neighborhood had spooked her. More than anything, she had wanted the sense of security that would come from having a house with a fenced yard and vigilant neighbors. But Brady's salary could barely cover rent, let alone the expenses of owning a home, and Karen's parents had already been paying her way through law school, a fact that relentlessly had been the topic of a conversation whenever the in-laws visited. The thought of borrowing down payment money for a house from the Greens sickened Brady. His temporary solution was abating Karen's fears while also avoiding further indebtedness to her parents. Had been a sneak $30 from the cookie jar where Karen had kept the grocery money. He scampered off to the animal shelter and returned 2 hours later with a puppy under one arm and a bag of dog food and adopted papers under the other. The new addition to the Tanner family would be dubbed McGruff for his supposed crime-fighting abilities, and never again would security be an issue. Less than a year later, Brady guided his Volkswagen through the winding roads that led to Bedlam's Fall. Gruff warmed the passenger seat, his oversized paws tucked under his chin. Yawning, Gruff raised his head and looked at Brady with a "pet me" look. Brady lovingly obliged and ran his fingers down Gruff's neck, scratching and petting the soft fur. As he drove, Brady's thoughts continued to drift. The book deal had been inked just a month after it had been first proposed. The process culminated with a final meeting in New York that had gone well, too well, in fact. A celebratory drink with his new editor, coupled with crosstown traffic, had caused him to miss his 5:30 p.m. flight back to Chicago. Brady had planned to treat an unsuspecting Karen to a night at Aubrey's, a Mexican restaurant on the city-trending west side. Although Brady wasn't sure how Karen's second trimester tummy bundle would react to spicy enchiladas, Brady thought Karen definitely deserved a 4-star meal. Pickles and pineapple cheesecake just weren't cutting it. Besides, what better place to tell Karen how much he had missed her than at a romantic candlelit table surrounded by serenaded mariachis? But, as misfortune would have it, Brady's surprise would have to wait till the weekend. His 6:45 p.m. alternate flight had been delayed as well. It wasn't until 10:30 p.m. that the plane finally touched down in the Windy City. "Brady, Brady," a familiar voice called. He scanned the throng of travelers merging to his left and spotted Will, Karen's brother. With a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, Brady burrowed through the congested terminal towards his brother-in-law, expecting to see an echo of excitement on the man's face. Instead, Will's eyes were red and puffy, and he looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Brady's smile vanished. "Damn you, Brady, where the hell have you been?" Will asked, grabbing Brady's shoulder with one trembling hand and steering him away from the crowd. Before Brady could respond, Will continued, choking back tears. "There's been an accident." "What do you mean, an accident?" asked Brady, his mind stuttering over the pain in Will's voice. "What happened to Karen?" Will's grip tightened on Brady's shoulder. "She's gone, Brady. Karen is dead." The sound of the blaring horns roused Brady from his reverie. A sharp turn of the steering wheel brought his car out of the lane of oncoming traffic. He peered into the rear view mirror, his heart still pounding. A pale face and eyes brimming with tears staring back at him. "Get a hold of yourself," he demanded under his breath. Brady wiped the salty wetness from his hazel eyes. With his vision restored and heartbeat once again nearing normal, he caught sight of a road sign. Bedlam's Fall, a great place to land. "Hokey," he scoffed it out loud. Brady's voice roused Gruff from his slumber. At the sight of his yawning companion, Brady pushed a button to lower the passenger side window. Assuming his canine co-pilot position, Gruff poked his head toward the sky, lapping the fresh breeze. Brady turned his attention from his passenger to the buildings and landmarks that were coming into view. The sight of the hayloft brought a hint of a smile to his lips. Standing just outside the city limits, the dilapidated, tavern hadn't been governed by the blue laws that had once banned the sale of alcohol. Brady's smile widened at the memory of swinging his first beer behind the dusty red barn. The parking lot was empty, save for an odd-looking man on a bicycle. Unkempt and unstable, he rode fruitlessly in wobble circles that cast long shadows across the barren blacktop. Scrawled across the tattered sandwich board sign that hung loosely around his neck was a single word: repent. With a snow-white beard hanging in a tangled mess between his knees, the haggard rider looked like a strung-out Santa. Bedlam's fall had definitely changed. Okay. The house was cradled with rolling hills and a thick copse of trees overlooking the lake. To those who had recently settled in or visited the area, the small body of water was known as Half Moon Lake for its crescent shape, but the locals knew it as Asylum Lake, an odd homage to an enormous psychiatric hospital and grounds that loomed on its northern shoreline. Abandoned and empty, Lakeview Asylum stood as a silent reminder of the town's dark history. One of only a handful of homes with lake frontage, the Up North House, as Brady's family fondly referred to it, had been built by his great-grandfather in the 1940s. Its log construction gave the appearance of a rustic hunting lounge. Brady paused in the driveway and stared through the dusty windshield down the overgrown pathway to the house. Although the afternoon sun left much of it in shadows, it was evident the Up North House had seen better days. Trees blocked the lake from his view, but not the sound of the gulls in the distance. Their cries echoed through the silence. He stepped from the Jetta and kicked the tangled grass and fallen branches that had collected through the changing seasons of neglect. The house, once meticulously kept, looked not merely vacant, but forgotten. Has it really been 14 years? Brady rounded the car to let Gruff out to stretch his leg. The dog bounded through the open door, pressed his nose to the ground, and started swinging his tail back and forth. He found the spot and relieved himself. Brady pondered his next move. He had never walked through that door without at least one of his parents in tow. The years since his last visit felt like a lifetime ago. Really, it'd only been half a lifetime. He thought his mother had lost her battle with breast cancer here in 2005 while watching the sun rise one last time over the lake. Dad's hand gently holding hers. Brady was miles away in Chicago chasing his dream, and Karen. His father had broken the news to him over the phone. "She's gone," was all he could muster. Brady thought he could hear the splash of tears through the receiver. Come home. So Brady had returned to Grand Rapids for his mother's funeral. Although his parents had retired to Bedlam's Fall following his mother's diagnosis, they kept their roots in Grand Rapids. His brief and infrequent visits had always been to their home in the city. He had become a connoisseur at brushing aside both their subtle and not so subtle invitation to spend time with them at the lake. Walking alongside his father to his mother's graveside memorial, Brady had been struck by how, over the years, time had chipped away at the man's chiseled features. The elder Tanner's sky-blue eyes were downcast and clouded with grief. His slumped posture and wilted gait had punctuated the utter emptiness and loss that now entombed him, feebly attempting to bridge the distance that had grown between them. Brady awkwardly placed a hand on his father's shoulder. After the service concluded, the Tanner men had returned to an empty house. Rolling into the driveway, the sight of the for sale sign in the front yard had fractured Brady's reservoir of strength. His head slumped into the steering wheel, tears finally spilling from his eyes. His father sat in the passenger seat, the distinctive scent of his aftershave providing a quiet comfort. A short while later, Brady felt the touch of his father's calloused hand gently settle on the back of his neck, a meaningful yet brief gesture that infused both of them with a renewed sense of hope. Without a word, Brady traced his father's footsteps up the paved walkway and into the house, a last chance to cling to the memories inside. Although the smorgasbord of casseroles, desserts, and other comfort food crowded the refrigerator, courtesy of the neighbors and friends, the elder Tanner and his son ate bologna sandwiches from TV trays while sitting in the front of the television. The Tigers were at home playing the third game of a 4-game series with the Indians and losing horribly. Brady stretched out on the couch and watched Detroit come from 4 runs down in the ninth to beat the Indians in the extra innings. From where his father was sleeping in the worn-out leather recliner, a rumble of snoring drowned out the sound of the play-by-play. The rocking chair his mother had always worn, which flanked the fireplace and was within easy reach of her yarn basket, now sat idle. Brady caught himself several times stealing glances in its direction, sure that he could hear the clinking of her knitting needles. The next day, Brady escaped from Grand Rapids, relatively intact emotionally, yet unsure of when or if he would return. He had glanced back only once as he made the long walk down the gate to board his flight. His father smiled weakly, nodded, and then turned and disappeared into the crowd. There was no tear-filled goodbye or final embrace, merely a silent acknowledgement of the loss they both felt. Brady never expected that nearly 3 years to the day he would be walking down the same gate into Grand Rapids General R. Ford International Airport for yet another tearful goodbye. This time for his father. Fitting, though, that both parents had drawn their last breath at the up north house, the sound of the loon singing them to their final sleep. And now here he was, at the one place he had sworn he would never return. The key in his hand felt like an anchor. It contained the weight of years of regret. He jingled it nervously inside his closed fist. "Okay, boy," he called to Gruff, then muttered under his breath, "Only thing we have to fear, and all that nonsense." They made their way slowly down the path to the front porch. Gruff, oblivious to the anxiety growing inside his seemingly stalwart companion, followed behind, distracted by the sights of sounds of nature, a city dog taking in his first dose of country life. Wildflowers and grass grew between the plank floorboards up over the wooden handrails and posts. Leaves and other debris collected in the corner and sunny webs hung from the weathered timbers overhead. The boards beneath his feet groaned as Brady stood motionless at the door. With a nervous hand, he scraped the key into the rusted lock and felt the click as the knob turned. The door opened into the den. Brady paused, breathing in the stale, musty air. It was mixed with a pine scent, evidence of a recent cleaning. Frank and Mattie Griggs, the closest thing his family had to neighbors on the lake, lived 4 miles away. Brady's father and Frank had been friends since childhood, and Mattie and Mom had been as close as sisters. Since his father's death, the Griggs had kept in touch with Brady through an occasional card or phone call to let him know they were as Frank put it, keeping an eye on things. Brady had always pledged to visit the next weekend or the next month, but time flew by and the seasons changed. The surprise in Frank's voice was unmistakable when Brady phoned him to say, "If you see the lights on this weekend, don't come and swing in your golf club. It'll just be me." They shared a laugh followed by an uncomfortable silence before Frank promised to have things in order for when Brady arrived. Having made good on his pledge to return, Brady felt as if somehow his mission had been accomplished, as if now he could turn tail and drive back to Chicago as fast as his Jetta could go. Then he noticed something. The blinds were drawn, providing just enough light to see a note taped to the wall by the switch. Brady reached for the note as he flipped on the light. Brady: Maddie ran a dust cloth around the place and I made sure the plumbing was kosher. Everything else seemed to be in order. There's a pie and some groceries in the fridge, just enough to welcome you back. We'll be up north this weekend, enjoying the view from the islands. We'll call when we get back. Frank. Brady smiled. Michiganders always go north to get away from it all, even those already living in the northernmost parts of the state. The Griggs year-rounder on nearby Bass Lake were no exception. Mackinac Island, located midway between the state's upper and lower peninsulas, had been their favorite vacation place for years. Hold on, y'all. Okay. I'm going to continue. Padded into the house, Gruff brushed past Brady, stirring him from his thoughts. Brady's gaze rose from the note. Open the door had been like breaking the seal on a time capsule. Brady's life had moved on, yet inside these all too familiar walls, it was 1995 all over again. Brady scanned the den. Trophies and photos, lined the shelves and walls, each capturing a moment in time, freezing it for display. His eyes retraced the years of his life, from diapers and toothless smiles to kindergarten graduation, little league, family vacation, and braces. God, how I hated those braces, he mused. Brady had spent the better part of 2 years not smiling because of those damn braces, convinced that he looked like James Bond's steel-toothed arch-enemy's jaws. To this day, he turned the channel in disgust any time a Bond movie came on TV. A loud clatter issued simultaneously with a sharp bark, and a low growl summoned Brady from his musing and sent him sprinting down the hall and through the kitchen to the source of the commotion. The shadows gave way to light as the afternoon sun poured itself in through the massive windows overlooking the lake. Gruff, with hackles raised and tail lowered, stood in the center of the room staring at the coffee table. Scrabble pieces were spread across its surface while others lay scattered on the floor. "It's okay, boy," Brady said, leaning down to soothe the dog with scratches behind his ear. "That tail of yours just swept one right off the table." Chuckling, he continued, "We'll solve the world's energy problem if we could harness the powers of that wag." Brady stretched out his hand and picked the pieces up from the floor and tossed them on the table. Scrabble had been Tanner's family tradition. Instead of church on Sunday mornings, it had been Dad's chocolate chip pancakes followed by a heated game of Scrabble. The game had remained a coffee table fixture both here and at the Up North house, as well as at their home in Grand Rapids. While Brady and his father had spent countless hours debating the rules surrounding the usage of slang and proper names, Mom used her background as a nurse for an endless supply of medical terminology that prove insurmountable, insurmountable, oops, let me highlight that, to the Tanner's men. Brady could count on one hand the number of times either of them had beaten her at a game of Scrabble. The memory lifted Brady's spirit as his focus drifted to the board, a bit surprised that Dad hadn't packed it away. Why would he keep it out after Mom was gone? Then, from among the towel pieces scattered across the tabletop, five squares stared up at Brady, starting from the center square and traveling downward with a single perfectly placed word. Hello. Okay, Mom, Dad. The blood drained from Brady's face as a strange yet familiar sensation crept over him. I bet. Gruff, rumbling growl returned. In an instant, his mind leaped from one possibility to the next. The tiles in the middle of the board would be at least likely to get disturbed when bumped. Simply physics, right? Or maybe Dad had started a game and never finished it, but with whom? No, Maddie probably set the pieces there when she was dusting. It would be like her clever way to welcome me back. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. The Rolling Stone lyric erupted from out of nowhere, causing him to jump with a girlish squeal. The tensions broke. Brady fished his iPhone from his pocket. Sympathy for the Devil was the ringtone he had assigned to his in-laws. He was far more impressed with the selection than Karen had been, and promised to change it out for something less dramatic. But, hope you guessed my name, the song continued, only because you saved us from the B. What? From the B horror movie Gruff and I were trapped. And do I answer this? He thought to the phone as he reluctantly pressed the button to accept the call. Hello? He answered. His voice contained more contempt than he intended to reveal. Brady? Thomas Green, Karen's father. I didn't catch you at a bad time, did I? His tenor clearly implied that he could care less if Brady was performing brain surgery. There was a message to be delivered, and deliver it this moment he would. No, Tom, Brady replied, emphasizing the name. He imagined steam pouring from his father-in-law's ear. He was Thomas. He had told Brady the first time they had met, which had been shaking hands across a crowded Thanksgiving table packed with Karen's relative. Thomas Green was the introduction. Both the words and the handshake were cold and brief. Welcome to our table. Thanks for inviting me, Tom, Brady replied, a lopsided grin sealing his fate. Karen had warned him about her father, but like watching a movie despite its negative reviews, Brady had refused to believe all that Karen had warned about her father. Determined to sit through the scene after awkward scenes, Brady would undoubtedly learn the long and hard way. It's Thomas, Mr. Tanner, was the curt reply. Then, in a sudden move, the man straightened his posture nearly to the point of snapping his spine. And then he continued, as my father and his father before him were named, not Tom. A Tom is a cat of some sort, I believe. He had smirked darkly. Soft snickers from around the table trailed the remark. The home crowd, if you will, was a receptive one. Brady's face reddened as Karen's father had looked down his long nose at him. Or a turkey, Brady said, his tongue outpacing his brain. He averted his eyes and looked at the enormous bird gracing the center of the table, packed with stuffing. The silence that followed was deafening and seemed to last forever. From the far end of the table, however, laughter broke, conquering the tension. Cheers, Brady. Come sit here by me. Fill your plate and your glass. It's Thanksgiving, for heaven's sakes. Brady turned to see a lanky, suit-clad 30-something 30-year-old standing and motioning with one hand toward an empty chair to his left. In the other, he held a glass of wine. Brady recognized Will immediately from the countless photo albums Karen kept. She spoke of him often and kindly. Let Karen catch up down there with Mom and Dad, he added. I'm Will, he said, extending his hand. Karen's brother, welcome to our happy home. With the last syllables, he shot a brief yet frosty glare at his father. Okay, y'all, this is 40 minutes in, and I'm not even finished with chapter 2. And I honestly ain't feeling this. It's too much description. And I don't think I could do it. I know I can't do it. I know I can't do it. I guess these type of books are not what I like to read. I'm going to say it's mystery. I don't like to read if it's not a dialect between people. I don't like the descriptive, long descriptive, unnecessary stuff. So I must apologize, but I do not think this book is for me. I don't think I'll be able to read it. I'm going to upload this and y'all tell me. Then again, I'm still not reading it. But I just wanted to give you something, and you can agree to disagree, but I don't think I can continue. I'm going to have to find another book. I can't do it, y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not sorry. I got to think of another book. Bye.